It's one small step for man, one giant leap for
Geeks. What's up, guys? I am your host, Mike C Squared, and this is One Giant Leap for Geeks. On this episode, we're going to be talking about Star Wars. I know, still. We've been talking about it for 2 years leading up to this, and we're probably going to be talking about it for another 2 years until episode 9 comes out. So get ready to get strapped in, because we're going to be talking about Star Wars broadly as a franchise, and specifically The Last Jedi. Now, I'm going to preface this entire episode with this. I am a passive fan of Star Wars. I like the franchise as a whole. I didn't grow up watching the movies. I don't have a visceral, reaction to the movies as a whole. I don't have a real attachment to the lore and the characters and continuity and things like that. I enjoy the movies, I watch them, and then I go on. Star Wars was never really my passion. But with that being said, I do understand Star Wars cultural weight and significance, and I understand why people love the franchise the way that they do. I get it. Now, like I said in the beginning, Star Wars has been talked about a lot lately, especially since the movie, as of recording this, came out about 2 weeks ago, I believe now. And, a lot of YouTubers and podcasters and, different people have weighed in on the movie and did their reviews and rants and things like that. And I didn't want to do that because I felt like I wanted to do something a little bit different. My show would be just kind of lost in a stream of other rants and things like that about Star Wars. Now, don't get me wrong. I am going to rant about Star Wars at a considerable length, so be prepared for that. But with that being said, there's specific things that I want to talk about that I haven't heard a lot of other people talk about that I want to address. And I want to say up front, spoilers, obviously. If you haven't seen the movie yet, I would assume at this point you either have no desire to, or you were, too busy to, and should probably be not listening to things like this anyway. So, that being said, spoilers. Also, this won't be a formal review. I'm just going to talk about different things throughout the movie, and it'll kind of be peppered through the podcast. So, I did not hate the movie. I didn't like it. I was kind of meh about it overall. But there were some things that did bother me and kind of soured me to the film overall. But specifically, Star Wars in general. Star Wars, to me, was always dumb fun. Star Wars was never, this super deep, rich thing. Now, I know there's a lot of lore built around the films through, like, the books and the games and, things like that, like the expanded universe stuff. But a lot of that stuff is not really in the films. A lot of it's implied, sure, but they don't really touch on a lot of those things. And the things that are brought up, I don't know, it just never really felt, all that dense for me, if that makes any sense. But still, the movies were good, but I mean, I never looked at it as this, like, deep, profound, thing. Aside from, the drama of the familial drama with, Darth Vader and Luke and Leia and things like that, in the religious, overtones of, like, the Jedi Order and the Sith and things like that, it was just pretty much they're chase movies in space, basically. There a lot of them were built off the concept of serial movies from back in the day. So, I get that. And that's why I'm like, Star Wars was never like this thing like that for me. But I understand people's problems with, this most recent iteration of Star Wars. The Force Awakens less so, but especially The Last Jedi. I get it, I do. I think people's problem with this movie is Star Wars now has become too meta. Star Wars was never about trying to be meta. And when The Force Awakens came out, it was kind of like this familiar yet fresh take on it, because the whole thing, story-wise, was about them trying to live up to these icons and legends of the past. The main characters, Rey and Kylo, are both trying to live up to their respective, ideological figures like Luke and Darth Vader. And the whole movie is about trying to take up these mantles and, fill in these roles, as these characters in this story. And it's meta in that respect of, we know that they're trying to make a new trilogy and continue on the stories from the original trilogy, yet at the same time make new characters and have them fill their own roles and become their own thing down the road and be characters that we all follow. And that was fine in The Force Awakens, but in this movie, it became meta in a way where they were trying to usurp and turn those concepts and ideas on their head, and it felt like the whole movie was kind of like a middle finger to The Force Awakens and just the franchise in general, because it just takes all these things in concepts and it twists them and makes them, I don't know if Rian Johnson was trying to go for, I don't know, some kind of Christopher Nolan Dark Knight, realistic take on like, oh, well, if this was, really happening, this is how these characters would turn out, and it makes sense for Luke to be jaded and cut off and this, that, and the other. And I don't know, his vision is not what the fans wanted overall, nor what they had set up prior to this in The Force Awakens. Now, it has been, through interviews and things like that, it's come out that when J.J. Abrams made The Force Awakens and he planted all these seeds about, Rey's parentage and, Kylo, and who is Snoke and, what's happening with Luke and things like that, like there was no clear path for where this was all going. This was all, just kind of set up, and the next director, who would be Rian Johnson, would just pick these threads up and run with them from there. There is no, outline for how this is all going to end, where these arcs are going, where these things, what all this, everything means, and, when Rian Johnson came in, it just felt like he just looked at these things and said, well, I don't like this, and I'm just going to throw all these things away and do my own thing. It's like, I don't want to, have a new, emperor, so I'm going to kill off Snoke. I don't want, to have, this image of Luke that's been built up over the years of, space Jesus and everything else. Like, I'm going to tear all that down and I'm going to humanize him and make him have all these flaws and things like that, which is fine to a point, but it just all felt so forced and unnecessary to tell the story that he was trying to tell, which by the end of the movie wasn't really about anything, because by the end of The Last Jedi, the status quo has not really changed at all. The Resistance or the Rebels now are still together. The Empire / First Order are still doing their thing. Yes, there's been losses on both sides and things like that, but the status quo is still basically the same. It's just Snoke is now out of the picture, and so is Luke. But they weren't really in the picture by the end of The Force Awakens, and so, fans assume that when going into The Last Jedi, they would play more prominent roles in this story and how this, continues on into Episode 9. But they're both killed off in this movie, and they have no real impact on anything that happens whatsoever. It's almost like by the time we ended at The Force Awakens, we jumped to Episode 9, and you could just skip this middle movie and not really miss a whole lot because nothing really happened. But with all that being said, my biggest issue with The Last Jedi and this new iteration of Star Wars in general is fucking Finn. What the fuck? Finn is the worst character in the history of Star Wars. Hands down. Fuck Jar Jar. Finn is terrible. Terrible. Trash. And I say it for this reason. Finn is a fucking shuckin' jiving, yes massa, just cooning the entire time he is on the screen. It is absurd. I remember when The Force Awakens was coming out and the first trailer was released, and they played the marketing in such a way for the longest time, all the way until the movie was released, making you think that Finn was the main character and that he would be the new Jedi in this franchise. He would be our new Luke Skywalker. And I was so happy about that. To see a person of color in a big franchise like this be put front and center as the main character unabashedly was a beautiful thing, and I thought that it would be a great character for young people of color to look up to and idolize and want to follow. That is not what we got. That is not Finn. Now, I'm not mad that he wasn't a Jedi or anything like that. Like, hey, you can be a character and not have to be a Skywalker or a Jedi and be able to use the Force in this franchise and still be cool. For example, historically, Star Wars has always had strong black characters. Lando Calrissian and Mace Windu were excellent characters in the Star Wars franchise. They were charismatic, they were strong male leads. Even though they were supporting characters, they still had screen presence, and they were never made to be goofy or idiotic or seem inept or just there for comedic relief or anything like that. Now, don't get me wrong, Star Wars is racist in a motherfucker. George Lucas and that fucking oh god damn it, if I knew the fucking lore better, I could tell you the name of them, but you know exactly who I'm talking about. Them fish-faced motherfuckers who speak in that like racist ass, stereotype Japanese, that, yo, Luke Skywalker, and all that kind of shit. Like, that is some foul ass racist shit. And Jar Jar Binks is, oh my god, that, oh lord, that is a Misa loves chicken and watermelon. Like that is, oh man, that is, oh yeah, that is rough. So, don't get me wrong. I'm not, glossing over that by no means, because that shit is fucked up. But with that being said, as far as the human characters, for the most part, Star Wars has always historically had strong black characters. Then we get to Finn. Finn he's a fucking joke. Like, I want so badly for him to come into his own and for me to give a shit about him. But honestly, if he would have died on that suicide run towards the end of the film, I would have, if Rose had not have saved him and they would have just let him die, I would have stood up and fucking clapped. I swear, it is absurd. Like, Finn, he is not a character to idolize. Okay, what are the characteristics of Finn? He's a space janitor. He's cowardly. He has no purpose in the story whatsoever. You could take him and all of his scenes out and almost nothing would change. And he's a traitor. He is thirsty as fuck. And that's supposed to be fine. And they keep making his part bigger in the films and giving him more to do, but it's always for comedic effect and just this weird, just out of place story. It's like they treat him like he's one of the fucking droids, like he's BB-8 or C-3PO or R2-D2. Like the situations that he's put in and how he reacts to things and just the characters he's paired up with and the role that he plays in those pairings. It's all just, it's so fucking it's disgusting, and it just makes me angry because John Boyega, the actor who plays Finn, he is a good actor. He can act his ass off, and he is fantastic in Detroit and Attack the Block. I mean, the guy is talented, but he's so misused in this franchise, and I was hoping that The Last Jedi, seeing as how that this was supposed to be the more serious, darker, this is the in-between movie in the trilogy, the middle movies are always the best in trilogies because, the stakes can be brought down so low. You can bring the characters down to their lowest low because you know that this will continue on beyond this. The first film, you set up the character and you get the audience invested in them, you give them a conflict, and then they overcome that, and then you want to see them continue on in their story for the next film. The second movie, that's when you really get to challenge them and delve into them and, really challenge the character. The third movie is usually the hardest one to do because that's the conclusion, and it's really hard to satisfyingly conclude a character's story for everyone. And I get that. That's why I don't trip about when third movies aren't all that great, because I can't think of many that are, to be honest. But with this being the middle darker movie, I figured like, okay, this will be the movie that, we really get a good characterization of Finn. Finn was such a fascinating character, or at least on paper, the idea of Finn was such a fascinating idea, because it was like a stormtrooper who ends up leaving, the First Order and going to the light side, and that struggle between, the things that he's done in his past and the future that he's trying to work towards, and how his childhood and his future and destiny was kind of robbed of him, by the First Order, and they take them as a children and kind of indoctrinate them into this, belief system and things like that. Like, all that was really interesting stuff, and they could have did some interesting stuff with that, and given him internal conflict as well as external conflict within the story, but they didn't do that. And okay, say for example, Captain Phasma. Okay, everybody was so upset about how underused she was in The Force Awakens, and all, everybody from Disney just kept saying like, oh, she's gonna have a bigger role in the next movie. We're really gonna, utilize her character this next time, and she's barely in the movie, and they kill her off, and it's in such a, just haphazard way. It's such bullshit. But with her character and her knowing and training Finn and them having their conflict from the first movie, I really thought this would be the time to have, you could craft a really great story around Finn and Captain Phasma and their relationship, and have a conflict between them, and actually given him something to do and given him an adversary in the story that was worth having. You know what I mean? there was so many things that they could have done with that character that it's just such a missed opportunity. I mean, he just feels so tacked on and forced. And when in the Force Awakens, he at least seemed like he was going to be important. I mean, but then right after his first scene, and the reveal of him taking off the helmet and him leaving, the ship and crashing on the planet, from then on out, well, honestly, no, because the moment he meets Poe, he turns into a fucking clown. And then from that moment forward, he's a fucking joke. I mean, you got him drinking out of fucking water troughs that, alien, animals drink out of and shit. I mean, he's shucking and jiving and cracking jokes and just doing all this shit throughout the movies. And it's just like, what is this? Like, why are we doing this? Like, who in these writers' rooms, during the production, I mean, even John Boyega himself, I'm sure he had to read some of this and been like, what is the purpose of my character in all this? Like, what am I doing here anymore? It's like you're sending him off on these missions in The Last Jedi and trying to seem like, oh, he's doing something, but it's like he's just thirsty for Rey. It's like he doesn't really care about the rebels. That's why that line fell so flat and fell so corny when he says rebel scum. I'm like, you are barely even a part of the rebellion. Like, you just kind of fell into it because you were chasing after Rey. You didn't care about fighting the First Order. You just didn't want to be a part of that shit anymore. Like, it's sad. But I'm gonna leave Finn alone. Finn is me and Finn, we're done. But the next thing I do want to talk about is fanboy culture around these movies in general. Guys, you're going to be upset at me, and try and hear me out, but it's kind of your own fault for being so angry at The Last Jedi. And I say it because of this. You guys have built up this movie in your minds to a point where almost nothing they could have done would have probably satisfied you. Now, granted, they kind of did a complete 180 on a lot of shit, and I get being mad at that. Like, I totally feel you on that. But these expectations that have been built up over the last 2 years, it would have been almost impossible to give satisfying answers to any of this stuff. Because let's say, yes, Snoke was Darth Plagueis. Everybody would have just said, see, I knew it. I told you. Ha. The thing that I thought I was right about there. Would you have been satisfied with that, though? Would that have been what you would have wanted? I mean, okay, and then what? And then now you have to tie these things into this new trilogy from the prequels? Is that really what we want? We want to bring the prequel baggage over into this now? Like, I don't know. I mean, wasn't one of the main complaints about The Force Awakens that we didn't want to keep revisiting the same things from the prior movies over and over, that we wanted to start to do something new and advance the stories forward? So why are we going to pull all the way back to the prequels to bring villains into this movie? Like, and I mean, okay, let's say Rey was a Skywalker or a Kenobi or something like that. Would that have been better? I don't really think so. I don't really think that that's what you guys wanted. Like, I think honestly, we're probably all really sick of the Skywalkers and the Kenobis. It's like, we need some fresh blood in this franchise if we're gonna let this continue on into the future. Like, Disney didn't pay all that fucking money to George Lucas to take this and make a handful of movies and shelf it for the next 20 years. Like, they're gonna keep cranking these things out for a while, and if they're gonna do that, they are they are going to have to make this franchise their own and advance this story in their own direction. I mean, now, Lord knows what the fuck is going to happen with Rian Johnson's supposed trilogy, because after the way fans reacted to this, I don't know if that's still going to fucking happen. We will see, though. Because if, there's anything to judge off of coming from the Han Solo movie, it could be a rough road ahead. Because we're all still waiting with bated breath to see how that movie turns out, because Lord knows what direction we're going in now. And I am curious if the direction of these movies changed because they knew of the reaction that people might have to The Last Jedi, which is fascinating to think about. And actually brings me to my next point. Disney fucked up. They did not handle fanboy expectations. Now, earlier when I said that this is kind of your guys' own fault, that was only half true. Half of it is your own fault. The other half is fucking Disney's fault. Disney did not handle the fanboy expectations well at all. They should have, like, seriously, they should have stopped feeding into these fan theories and let fan the flames of this shit and just let it grow into this wildfire. Like, yes, buzz is good. To have 2 years worth of buzz around your movie, that is great and an invaluable resource that you cannot put a price tag on. That is awesome for you as a studio when you're making a movie, to have people constantly talking and theorizing about it for years in between movies. That is phenomenal. But at what cost, though? You set these things up knowing that you had no plans directly for where this was going to go in the next film. You let Rian Johnson come in. He looks at The Force Awakens. He's like, fuck all that. I'm not doing none of that. I'm doing my own thing. So I'm throwing all this shit out the window. We're going to tear all this shit down, and I'm going to do my own thing. Now, you know that this is going to have some kind of reaction from the fan base, especially because they had such a positive reaction initially to The Force Awakens. Now, it did sour a little bit over time, but overall, for the most part, I think fans still like that movie, for the most part. But the problem is that all these threads that they started in The Force Awakens, they inverted it or ignored it, and Johnson was just allowed just way too much free reign to just do whatever he wanted, and there's no clear tone in the franchise anymore. It's like, you've set this tone in The Force Awakens, and yes, the second film is going to be about, different things, and it's going to have a slightly different tone, but the overall theme is still the same throughout, or at least it should be. And this just felt like it was just a fucking mess. And it was like, well, what did, like, Disney, like, what did you think was going to happen? Like, you had to have known on some level that, hey, if we don't get out in front of this shit and calm these people down about Snoke and Rey's lineage and things like that, knowing that we have no intention on giving a answer to it, or you could say an answer that is going to be satisfying to the level of theories that they've built up. Now, in any instance when you're making a movie, it's almost impossible to live up to expectations that people have when they really like it and they're really excited about it. I get that. But this went into, they're pulling shit from just like lore from all over the place, books and things like that, and it could be this person. Hell, we were theorizing for a while that Mace Windu was Snoke. Come on, man. Like when did Sam Jackson become Andy Serkis? Like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, come on. Like, we're just theorizing just nonsense after a while, and Disney just let it go because they wanted the buzz about their movie. They could care less that these people were going to be pissed off when they revealed these things to them. They were just like, hey, if this keeps them talking about it, great. Like, whatever happens in between now and then, whatever, as long as we just keep them hyped up and jazzed about it, that's the most important thing. And that is not the right way to go about this. That was a wrong mindset to have going into this, because these people are pissed off, and you could have at least curtailed some of this, because you knew that this was not going to play out in the way that they were expecting it to. And I mean, that could be a good thing to subvert their expectations, but not like this. No, this felt like just a spit in the face. Like, it's not because it wasn't the thing that they wanted it to be. It's not that, oh, my theory was wrong. It's not that. It's just that instead of, fans would have accepted a different backstory for these characters like Rey and Snoke and Luke, and different endings than, or futures than what people had predicted that they would have in this franchise. But that's not what the issue is. It wasn't that their theories were wrong. It's like you almost deliberately said, because these theories have grown into these giant, multi-layered, speculations of the characters and their future and what this all means and where the entire story is going and yada yada, that it was like, we're just gonna drop it all together. Like, you answered it with an answer of, it's a non-answer. It's, okay, Rey's parents are nobody. So it's almost like you didn't answer it, but you did, and just to kind of get rid of it. Snoke is no one. Snoke's dead, so it doesn't matter who he was or where he came from or how he got into power or whatever, because he's dead now, so he's irrelevant. Like, that's why people are mad, because it feels like you just planted these seeds and then just said whatever and chucked it out the window. And it was like, well, then what was the whole point? I mean, this second movie, not only does it not advance the overall story for the trilogy in any way, but it negates the purpose of the first movie, because all the things that were set up in the first movie has been pretty much wiped clean. And it's like, well, what was the point of any of that? We set up the Knights of Ren in The Force Awakens, have no answer, no reference to it, nothing in this movie. The Jedi Order that Luke had started, no real explanation or backstory explanation of that, nothing. What Luke, what really, made him go into exile and things like that, they kind of explain it, but kind of not. But it's really hard for me to believe that because he had that moment of weakness and self-doubt and almost, killed Kylo in his sleep, that would just completely make him throw the entire, original trilogy worth of lessons that he learned out the window, and plus whatever else happened to him during that time that were never really explained or talked about. Like, it's like, give us an answer. It doesn't have to be the answer that the fans want, but don't give us one that negates the point of the question in the first place, It was just a movie of nothing but fake outs and unsatisfying, alternate outcomes, But, alas. One other thing that I wanted to address while talking about expectations and fanboy culture and things like that is, I'm surprised at how little backlash there's been over Rey and Rose and Finn, but at the same time, not surprised at the amount that has come out. I guess what I'm trying to say is, when The Force Awakens came out, or was, being teased in trailers and things like that, a lot of people came out with really loud voices on a lot of different platforms being upset about Finn. And they did not like the fact that there was going to be a black male lead in a Star Wars movie, which is fucking ridiculous because, again, Mace Windu, Lando Calrissian, I don't get it. I mean, Boba Fett, like, he's not black, but he's a person of color. So it's like, I never understood. But it's just like the venom and just the vitriol that was just spewed at, John Boyega and just the movie in general, and then Rey, and, them not wanting a woman to be in, especially once, it was revealed that she was the main character, and she was going to be the new Jedi in this franchise going forward, and she's the character that we're going to follow through all this. It was just nasty, just the kind of shit that came out, but just when The Force Awakens came out, like the bigots and the racists and sexists, they came out too in force, and it was ridiculous. Now with this movie, they're still there, but it just doesn't seem like their voices are as loud this time, or maybe it's just that it's not getting as much coverage as it did a few years ago when Force Awakens was coming out. It's like there's been so much racism and sexism and bigotry, in popular culture lately that it's kind of fallen on deaf ears maybe now. I don't know, but I don't know. Like, it's. I feel ashamed sometimes to be a geek and to like things and be a part of a fandom and have a passion for these certain things, because I guess with anything in life, these things will draw in all types of people, and they're not always all good people. But just some of the things that have been said about these characters from this movie, especially like, Rose, for example, like I've heard her called all kinds of things. I mean, from, just racial slurs to fat shaming her and wishing death upon the actress for being in the movie and just all kinds of things. And it's like, come on guys, like what are we doing here? Like, where is this shit coming from? Like, I don't remember people talking that crazy shit when Donnie Yen was in Rogue One. I mean, he was cool, but what? It's because she's a woman, like, so it's okay to just dog her out and shit? Like, why are we doing that? It's like, I guess the Finn got his licks, so he's not, I don't really hear shit about him besides the fact that they're like, oh, they're, pairing him up, with another, minority or whatever, which I will say kinda maybe a little bit feels like, Disney's like too afraid to go all the way with this whole, trying to be as diverse as possible thing, and, don't want to piss the fanboys off completely, so they don't want to hook Rey and Finn up, even though this entire series from these last two movies has seemed like it's been building to that, but then they keep shying away from it or keep trying to throw obstacles in between them. Like, I mean, so much so to the point where it almost seems like they kind of are going to hook Rey and Kylo up together. I mean, I don't really know what's going on with that, but who fucking knows? But it's just it's ugly to just see people act like that, and over fictional characters in a fictional universe. It's like, come on guys, like what are we doing? There is no precedent set. There is no thing where people can make the argument of, oh, well, they're just changing the character's ethnicity for this, that, and the other, yada yada yada. It's like they can do whatever they want with these characters, but it just seems like the fact that they cast someone who's not Caucasian drives some of these people just insane, and it makes me nauseous to even think about it. It's like, why are you so wrapped up in your hatred or your mindset that you can't enjoy something if there's someone who doesn't look like you in the movie? Like, that's sad, and I feel sad for you. But anyway, I want to close this whole thing out with, where are we going from here now? What's next for episode 9 / whatever this new Rian Johnson trilogy that's not associated with anything that's in this current trilogy is even going to be about? Because I've heard some people kind of talk about the kids at the end of The Last Jedi and Canto Bight, the Force sensitive kid, and whatever, like, oh, he's planting the seeds for his new trilogy, this, that, and the other. It's like, I don't really think that he is, because from at least the way they're making it sound, and just looking at what he did with this movie, it seems like whatever he does for his movie is going to be a way, way, way different direction than anything that we've been setting up in these movies. Like, I don't think there's going to be a First Order Jedis, like really anything. I think it'll be Star Wars in name only, and he's going to just go off and make Valerian 2 or some shit. Like, I don't fucking know. Like, this dude, it seems almost like he doesn't like Star Wars, to be honest. Like, it almost felt like if they had me make the movie and I didn't like it, more than he doesn't like it. It's like I'm a passive fan of Star Wars, but it just seems like he just fucking hated Star Wars, and he was like, oh, all this shit that y'all like about it, fuck you, and fuck all these characters that y'all care about so much. Like, I'm just gonna shit all over it and you're gonna love it. But my thing is, where do we go from here now? Like, how do you, what is episode 9 even gonna be about? I mean, JJ has some work to do to win over fans again, like, while not completely changing the direction, of what Rian Johnson set up in this movie. I mean, I guess he could just pull a Rian Johnson move and just say, like, you know what, remember all that shit? Well, fuck all that. We bringing Snoke back. Psych, Rey's parents really is Luke Skywalker and some chick that Kylo killed when he burnt down a temple or whatever. Like, I don't know, man. Like, it's like you set up all these things in The Force Awakens that, a lot of it felt like retreads and we were rehashing a lot of things, but at the same time, it felt different enough to where people may not have loved the idea of where it was going, were still along for the ride and were willing to give it a chance. And were excited when the new movie was coming out to see how we were going to resolve some of these questions and where this was going to go. What did all this mean that we had set up in The Force Awakens? And in this, we've taken all the unanswered questions, answered them, but answered them in an unsatisfying way with non-answers, did away with the questions altogether by either killing off the characters or making the questions irrelevant once they've been answered because they don't actually play a role in anything and have no real significance. And now what? It's like, who is our villain of this last movie? Kylo? Really? He's the villain? He barely knows if he wants to be the villain. Yeah, he might have flip-flopped at the end, and it's like, oh, he's bad. But it's like, okay, he did that at the end of The Force Awakens. He's flip-flopping through the whole movie. He finally flops on the dark side and kills Han, and then tries to kill Rey and Finn, and, blow up the universe or whatever the fuck they were trying to achieve in that movie. But he doesn't, he doesn't stay that way, because by the beginning of The Last Jedi, you see him hesitate to kill Leia, and, he's having these heart-to-hearts with, Rey, and it just seems like throughout the whole film, he just can't decide what he wants to be, and he doesn't know where his path is in all this. And just because he seemed to have gone over to the dark side again in this movie doesn't mean that he's gonna be any less conflicted in the next one. And it's like, to be honest with you, I don't want to see him as the big bad. Like, I wanted there to be someone over him and then he could be the conflicted villain, kind of like in Thor Ragnarok, where Hela was the main villain, and then you had that Asgardian guy that she turns, I can't remember that character's name, but that she turns to her side, and he betrays Asgard and works with Hela and helps her, take over, and she's like her first in command, and then by the end, he feels remorse for what he's done, and he wants to save his people, and he turns against Hela. Like, now I didn't necessarily need Kylo to turn good by the end. I don't need him to pull a complete Darth Vader move, but at the same time, I don't mind him being a conflicted character. But if you're going to do that, he can't be the main villain, because we know that he is conflicted, so the entire time we never buy his quote-unquote resolve to do bad things, because it feels forced, because we as an audience know that he pushes himself to do these things because he's trying to be bad even though he really doesn't want to be. And that's a problem. You cannot have a compelling villain when the villain doesn't really even believe in being a villain. Not only that, it's like, boy, Luke has that line where he says, oh, I will not be the last Jedi. Who the fuck is finna train Rey? Rey can't train nobody to do shit. She barely knows how to do the shit that she can do already. And the books, she has that. What does that even mean? What does that mean? Yoda flat out says that the books are not important. That is not important. And he sets the tree on fire with a lightning bolt and says, Rey has everything she needs, which is just a play on words because he knows that she has the books already and it's not even in the tree, so that's why he's not tripping about it burning down. But at the same time, if the books, according to the way he makes it seem, like the books do hold some importance, so either they do or they don't. And even if she does read and study and this, that, and the other, it's like, so we're making her even more of a Mary Sue to say, like, oh, all these old ancient Jedi texts, she's gonna read up on this and become the greatest Jedi to have ever lived with no real help. It's like you kind of negate the influence and power of Yoda and Obi-Wan and Luke and all these other, Anakin and all these other strong Jedi and Sith from over time, when it's just like, hell, and it keeps undermining your villain. Look at Kylo. How the hell am I supposed to take him seriously as a villain when the hero has had little to no experience doing anything and can match and best him in battle and in force abilities and everything else and Jedi mind tricks and all this other kind of shit, and he's been being trained since he was a child. He was trained for a good amount of time by Luke Skywalker and Snoke, who seemed to be more powerful than both y'all combined until the script needs him not to be and you kill him on some dumb shit. But you can't make me believe that Kylo is going to be a good villain when he's undercut by your hero who doesn't even have to try. It's like we're trying to get rid of all this, the chosen one and lineage and destiny and all this other kind of shit, but at the same time you're still playing into it. You can't have your feet in both ponds. Like, it doesn't work like that. You have to choose. Either we're gonna do away with that shit and we're gonna start a new thing, or we're gonna stick with it and honor it, the tradition, and keep going with it. Like, you can't keep jumping back and forth. So JJ's got a lot of work to do to try and fix this. Like, I'm really gonna be fascinated. Like, if anything, if the third movie in this new trilogy is the highest grossing movie of this franchise, it will not surprise me, because I am going to be there on day one to see how they are going to fix this shit. Because honestly, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'm done with Star Wars, I'm never going to see Star Wars again. And some of them probably, really believe in their conviction, and they might not go see another Star Wars movie again. I don't know. But I know that there's going to be a good portion of those people who, even though they're upset at this last movie, are still going to go because they want to see if they can fix this. And I want to see if they can fix this. And if they do, how the hell is he going to do it? Because J.J. Abrams is synonymous with setting up mysteries and setting up questions to be answered, but he's not very good at the answering them part. And he jumps ship after he's set up the questions, like with Lost. Lost is not his show. That is not his baby. That was him and Damon Lindelof's thing, but he was there in the beginning to help set it up. But then after the first few episodes, or maybe even that first season, he jumped ship and went on to do his thing with Cloverfield and Super 8 and all that other shit. Like, he was out of the picture as far as that goes. And so once he set up the questions, he just left, and it was somebody else's job to answer it. Kind of like with Cloverfield. He didn't direct that movie, he just produced it, but it set up all these questions in the movie, and then we never go back to it and don't revisit it. Like Star Trek movies, things that he set up in those movies, not so much questions or MacGuffins or things like that, but just different arcs for characters and things like that he doesn't stay through to the end to give the conclusions to these things. He did not have a idea of where the story was going to go after The Force Awakens. He had no answers for Rey. He had no answers for Snoke. He had no answers for the Knights of Ren. He had no answers for Luke. He had no answers for Kylo. This was just like, hey, this is your thing now. Go do it. So now, it almost feels like Disney went out and found his ass, and it was like, look, motherfucker, you painted us into this corner. We gave it to this motherfucker. We told him he could do what he wanted to do. Johnson fucked it up. So now we bringing your ass back in here, and you finna fix this. You are going to see this through to the end, and you are going to make this right. Even though, to be fair, it's not his fault of what Rian Johnson decided to do with those threads that he left. Either don't address them in the next movie if you're not going to address them in a way that aren't going to piss people off, or let JJ do the next movie, or, you know, make sure that, hey, you know, whoever you do give it to, it's like, you have to, you know, see this out. You have to get this right. You have to make sure that this goes somewhere. We're not just, you know, twirling our thumbs and just, you know, asking questions that we really have no real care to answer. But regardless of what JJ does with the episode 9, what is going to happen with this Rian Johnson trilogy? That's the real question, because I really would be really amazed if he still gets to make this trilogy after the reaction to The Last Jedi. I do not think that Kathleen Kennedy would go through and pull the trigger on this, seeing how people reacted to The Last Jedi. So, I mean, she's a smart businesswoman. She knows what she's doing. I mean, a lot of people, you know, hate her fucking guts right now and think she's the Antichrist. But I mean, you know, she did not get to where she is by making bad business decisions. Now, she's, as a business, from strictly a business standpoint, take creativity, take fandom, take all that stuff out of it. Just look at straight dollar bills and turnover, okay? Strictly business. From a business standpoint, she has to look at the fans' reaction to this movie and say, this, in the long run, is not going to be profitable for the franchise. These fans, while yes, are fickle and can flip-flop on their feelings from one movie to the next, and not even from in between movies can flip-flop on their feelings about the one that just came out. But for the most part, you want to keep the base happy. If you cannot keep the base happy, they will start to jump ship. And if you want to justify the investment that you made in this franchise to acquire it, then you have to produce films that make people want to continue watching Star Wars. You can't just keep trying to deconstruct the mythology of the series and expect people to keep wanting to come back to it. People love Star Wars because it's Star Wars. If you don't want to make Star Wars movies, don't make Star Wars movies. But if you do, stop trying to tear them apart and make them into something that they're not. They're not about whatever this new vision that you're trying to turn them into is. Now, you can make a story into anything you want, but it has to get there organically, and this does not feel organic. This does not feel like a natural evolution of these characters, of these stories, of this mythology. It just feels like we want to do something different, so we have to. I mean, it's become so meta that you're even saying it in the movie. You're saying, you know, let the past go, kill it if you have to. You're literally killing the franchise from what people know it as, so it can be something different. You're not just trying to say we're going to start our own path. You're saying that we're going to start our own path and burn the old one down behind us. Like, you can't do it that way and then think you're still going to see a return on your investment the way that you want to. Like, people aren't going to keep giving you their money to see movies that they're dissatisfied with. So from a business standpoint, she has to look at this and go, okay, either one of two things need to happen. Either A, we let Rian Johnson make his movies or write them. I don't know if he would be directing the new trilogy as well, but we let him write these movies, but with the clear guidelines of we have to stay within, at least to a degree, what people are familiar with and want to see in Star Wars. We can't, change the formula too much, because then it becomes something else and then people won't like that. Or B, scrap it all together, start over with a new trilogy idea and go from there. It can either continue on with the stories of Rey, Finn, and Kylo, what the way it seems like, though, this isn't going to be a continuation. This won't be like the original trilogy where these characters bridge off into another trilogy. It seems like once they finish this episode 9 that they're just done with these characters in this world, this universe in general, or this part of this universe. So, I mean, ideally, I don't know where to go or where I would want the story to go from here in a new trilogy, but whatever this shit that Rian Johnson is probably cooking up right now is probably not, for the most part, where we as a whole want to see all this go. He's proven that he does not want to live in the world that Star Wars has created, that he wants to make his own thing. So why not let him make his own thing? Why even call it Star Wars? Why relate it to Star Wars? If you're going to change everything about it that makes it Star Wars, why make the movie? Just make something else. Make another Elysium, make a Valerian 2, make a whatever, but you can call it whatever you want to call it, but why call it Star Wars if we're going to change everything about Star Wars that makes it Star Wars? Well, with all that being said, what do you guys think? Will you reject the new Rian Johnson Star Wars trilogy? Are you excited to see episode 9 and how they're going to try and bandage up this franchise and finish it out on a high note? Do you care at all? You can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, and Facebook, One Giant Leap for Geeks. And on Twitter, just look for @GiantLeap, the number 4 Geeks. See you guys next time. Batman doesn't need any of that shit. I mean, fucking look at Michael Keaton's Batman. His hair was fucking ridiculous. Jesus Christ. I mean, look at it. It was horrible.